let me give you a short introduction. Thank you very much for joining us for this event on a topic, cybersecurity, which is close to everybody's personal experience, but also to the Austrian export economy. Australia is one of Austria's major overseas trading partners, with a trade volume of approximately 2 billion euro per year. Last year, we almost reached the level of 2019. So we are back on track, I would say, with our economies. Our two countries are working together in many industry sectors through the exchange of products and services. And you might know that Austria sells cars, rail vehicles, railroad technology for hydropower and other machinery, and engineering services to Australia. And Australia sells coal and nickel to Austria, as well as switchboards for communication and machines for the inspection of semiconductors, just to give you a few examples. There is also mutual investment, and some of it is in communications, also for the defense industry here in Australia, and energy, Australian funds investing in Austria, both sectors for which cybersecurity is crucial. But we would also like to look at communication in the public space today and what Australia is doing to protect citizens, companies, and state entities from cyber threats. So I have already introduced Anita Para, founder and CEO of Kite Consulting. Anita is Austrian, but is based in Melbourne. Marion Pfeffer, Executive Manager of Privacy Compliance in Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Marion is also originally Austrian, and she is based in Sydney. And our first speaker, the Honorable Victor Dominello. In 2019, Victor was appointed the world's first customer service minister, a role he undertook passionately and is recognized globally for the role he played in transforming public service delivery in New South Wales. So this is something special. Victor is someone who has been recognized by The Australian, a newspaper, as one of the country's top 100 innovators. Victor is also the director of the University of New South Wales and University of Technology of Sydney Trustworthy Digital Social Hub. And he is a board member of the Tech Council of Australia. Victor is also the chair of the Federal Ministerial Advisory Committee on Digital ID. So with this introduction, Victor, I would be so happy if I could hand over to you now, but something seems to be not going right yet. I beg you to bear with us for a little while more.
It wouldn't be a really good tech conference if there wouldn't be a technical issue.
If there wouldn't be a Anita,
yes.
What do you say if I start with you?
Perfect.
And if we just jump into it. Luke was supposed to give a deeper introduction of what you've done. Please go ahead, Anita, the floor is yours. And thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Ulrike. And again, thank you so much for having me here today. So I'm in Australia since 17 years, always worked for global consultancies, or mostly for global consultancies and technology companies throughout those 17 years. And as part of those roles, I got really good insights into the local, I guess, economy and local corporations, mainly mid-sized to large organizations, and their challenges on, I guess, going with the digitization and being innovators and being influencers in the global market scale. And I mean, some of those, typical challenges which I could see is there's always this external pressure, or this pressure within organizations to deliver more revenue, to save costs, to have seamless customer experiences. But then equally, there's also the internal pressures of organizations just dealing with the reality of legacy systems, of fragmented data silos, of having to deal with multiple technology vendors. And with that, the whole topic of cybersecurity is just sort of going through the roof, because you have sort of those the external pressure points, but then also the internal pressure points. And when it comes to, I guess, technologies, organizations have, specifically large organizations, and I'm very interested to hear your point of view on that, Marion, very soon, is what I see is large organizations typically deal with a whole range of software and technology vendors, right? It's usually not one sort of vendor or a couple of vendors. It's usually 20, 30, 50, maybe even 100 different vendors. And then within those vendors, technology vendors have different technology roadmaps, and they have different data centers, and they have different cybersecurity protocols. So as an organization, it's really difficult then, if you have all those vendors, to start dealing with an overarching cybersecurity strategy. And if you look at another lens on top of that, in terms of what's happening in the Australian market, right? Cybersecurity attacks are going up. The sophistication of cybersecurity attacks is going up. Compliance requirements is going up. There's all these different regulations around privacy acts and notifiable data breaches and industry-specific regulations. And equally, Australia, and that's probably interesting for some of the audience here in the room, Australia is also has gone through its wave of a real shortage of skilled professionals in that space. So there's all these complexities, which then, as an organization, what do you do, right? So you can choose to engage experts. You may tap into external experts, into overseas expertise, which, again, if not managed right, can open up cybersecurity risks. And then the other question is, okay, if there's all these risk factors, how well is the organization prepared to deal with an incident when an incident actually occurs? So, preparing for this talk, for me, it really boiled down to two things. Is like, what are your key risks in the organization, considering all those various complexities and the pressure to deliver results fast on modern technology? And then also, how well are you prepared as an organization to deal with an incident if an incident occurs? And the whole matrix across that is really around, what's the risk appetite in an organization? Because everyone may say, I want to minimize my risk for a cybersecurity attack to happen. But reality is, minimizing the risk also comes with a cost, right? It comes with a cost of managing that. It comes with a lack of opportunity, or a lack of speed to market, a lack of being able to move fast, innovate, and be agile, because you're locking everything down to minimize risk. And with that, I might pause there. There's more to that for me than to address those two topics, of how do you deal with, minimizing risk, and what can you do to manage when a business incident actually happens. I just wanted to check in with my co-speakers of what you guys have to say to this topic.
Luke, maybe you want to take over conference mastering?
I think everyone now is connected and we can all hear each other.
Perfect.
As Anita said, you think after 3 years with COVID and having to use Zoom and Teams and getting everything working, you think we'd be experts by now, but obviously we're not there yet. So maybe we'll need like a beginner's training course just to get stuff working again. But I want to thank you all for joining AußenwirtschaftsCenter today. And my name is Luke Brewer. I'm the tech manager here at the Sydney office. And we look after a range of sectors here within our Sydney office, but today's focus is on the tech and cyber industry here in Australia. Before continuing to introduce this topic and hand the floor over to our expert panelists, here in Australia, there is a custom where we acknowledge the Aboriginal people on the land that we live and present. Therefore, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respect to traditional owners of the land on which we present and meet today. And I would also like to pay my respect to the elders past and present. We have many different industries joining us today, from technology, banking and cybersecurity software solutions to consultancy, energy, government and AI. So it just shows the depth of interest for this topic within the Australian market. As Ulrike has mentioned, we will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So please type your questions into the Q&A session, into the Q&A section. And also when it is time for that Q&A session, we'll also try to have some live questions. So just raise your hand and we'll try to activate your microphone so you can speak directly to us. Just a little bit of an introduction to into the tech industry here in Australia. And for many of you asking why explore Australia's tech and cyber industry, Australia has positioned itself as a leading digital economy, with the country's rapid digital transformation leading to the tech sector becoming the fastest growing area for skilled development, and is projected to contribute to 150 billion Australian dollars to the Australian economy by 2030. So these are big numbers we're talking. The Australian government has outlined key aims to make Australia a global leader in digital economy and has identified cybersecurity and cyber as one of the 6 industry sectors considered vital for long-term prosperity of the Australian economy. As we're all aware, and I'm sure, we've had many cyber attacks that have made international headlines, but cyber attacks are on the increase, and we know that, and they're 32%. Have increased 32% in the past year. We've seen major cybersecurity attacks in Australia, which have made international headlines, one being Optus, which is Australia's second largest telecommunications company, and Medibank, which is one of Australia's largest private health insurance providers. This has laid bare Australia's cyber threat landscape and the strategic need across all facets of life, so government, industry and community, to enhance Australia's cyber resilience and critical tech infrastructure, and to encourage obviously more investment within cyber and tech. We also need to consider the global situation we're in and the geopolitical tensions that are on the rise. So the need for like-minded countries like Australia and Austria to work together and find solutions, as these attacks are becoming more dangerous and sophisticated, and obviously our governments are looking to implement and stronger cyber regulations. As Ulrike has already introduced our panelists, I might just move in straight to introducing our first speaker in detail, and that's Mr. Victor Dominello. The Honourable Victor Dominello is the former Senior New South Wales Government Minister for Customer Service and Digital. In 2019, he was appointed the world's first customer service minister, a role he undertook passionately and is recognised globally for, and delivering public service here in New South Wales. In 2023, Victor co-founded and launched Service Generation, which provides advice to governments and large organisations to help them shift their services and their timings. In July of 2022, Victor was also recognised by the Australian newspaper, so it's a publication here in Australia, as one of the country's top 100 innovators. So Victor, I will leave the floor to you to address our audience here today. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Luke, and thank you for having me, and apologies for the technical difficulties, but we're here now. In New South Wales, I was a minister for 12 years, and of the last 8 years, I was really in the data, digital, customer experience space, which included leading the Agency for Cyber Security New South Wales, which he established. We also established an agency called ID Support, and I'll come to that in a moment, and we set up a department exclusively for customer service, which is designed to be a central agency to cut across all the silos of government. In government, you get lots of silos of transport, of health, of defence, of police, but there's no real department that cuts across the top for the benefit of the individual. Governments are never really designed for true whole of government service delivery. We're designed around silos. But if you look at the corporate sector and what corporate success looks like, you have a CEO, like a prime minister, you have a CFO, like a treasurer, and you have a COO. But governments don't have that COO, that chief operating or chief customer or chief information officer. My role was essentially like a COO, stitching all the experiences where I could together to have optimal outcome for service delivery. The key focus for me, and now nationally in my role as chair of the ID expert panel and chair of MyGov expert panel, is around digital identity. And we're definitely looking towards what Europe's doing in relation to the eIDAS 2 and how the EU is going to essentially go down that wallet system by 2026-27. I think that is really critical to building trust. As Luke indicated, we had a major cyber event a few years ago, and as a result, a whole lot of paper credentials and plastic credentials that were put into the internet and then no doubt into the dark web, such as copies of driver's licenses and passports, were compromised. And that resulted in lots of Australians, many millions, having their identity compromised. One of the lessons we've learnt from that is that we need to create a separate agency, which we did, called ID support, because increasingly you're going to have failure. There's just no doubt about it. How do you plan for that failure? Well, one of the things you've got to assume is that individuals' identity will be compromised, despite your best efforts, despite your best cyber defences. How quickly then can you get that individual back on his or her feet? And what we did with ID support, because in Australia and no doubt like places in Europe, there are a whole lot of agencies that have part of your identity. In Australia, we've got a passport that's delivered by one agency, driver's licenses driven by another agency, birth certificates by another agency, your health data by another agency. All of these are essentially sub-credentials of your identity. And for an individual, for their identity to be compromised means that they are going to have to ring up not just four, but potentially many, many more agencies and utilities and organisations and banks and superannuation funds, etc., to say, this is really me. I know there's a flag on my name, but it's really me. So creating that central agency to do all that heavy lifting for the individual was really important to building trust, because it's like when somebody falls overboard on a ship, you'll be pretty angry at the ship, but when somebody's pulling you out of the water, you're going to be saying, thank you, you're my saviour. So getting somebody out of the water really quickly is super important to trust. The other thing that we really focused on was creating a front door, a digital front door for people in our state. And that's what's really been seen to be globally recognised. We have an app called Service New South Wales app. 85% of the adult population have adopted it. And that includes a digital driver's licence and a whole lot of other digital credentials. And it's got a satisfaction score of about 92%. So it's extremely high. There's lots of countries around the world that have a digital driver's license or a front door of sorts. But the reason I go to the White House and so many other places now at the invitation of other governments and companies is because of that 85% adoption. You know, most organisations, if it's opt-in, if you mandate it, sure, you're going to get close to 100%. But if it's opt-in, you'll get the early adopters, innovators, early adopters, etc. And you normally plateau around the 30, 40, 50%. And then every 10% above that is harder and harder and harder to get. Another jurisdiction in Australia had a digital driver's license at about the same time as ours. They got to 30%. In Queensland, they've launched theirs, given that theirs is still in the early stage, but they're at 10%. But to get to 85% is just unheard of. And that was because we had a really good, exceptional customer experience. We built trust in the system, a lot of control for the individuals to determine what settings they want, what information they're prepared to share, etc. And a multifaceted approach, i.e. it wasn't just a digital driver's license, it was a number of other digital products and services, again, across government, that horizontal play, where it truly became that one-stop shop. So this is where the Australian government is trying to move to pretty rapidly as well, creating that front door to government. I'll end with this example. When I was a minister, the advice I got from so many bureaucrats, public servants, was that there's no wrong door to government. You know, we should say there's no wrong door. But I think that really helps the public service rather than helping the individual. I said back to the public service, well, there may be no wrong door, but there's only one front door. So if as government's like a haunted house, not many people want to go there. They only go there if they really, really have to, because it's quite scary for the average person. And if you want to enter the haunted house via the moat, you can do it. If you want to go via the trap door, you can do it. If you want to go through the back door and the broken glass, you can do that too. But if you come through the front door, we'll have a really good experience for you. We'll hold your hand. We'll navigate you through that haunted house with lights on to make it less scary. So that's basically what we've done in New South Wales and what we're trying to help the federal government do as well. So I might stop there, Luke.
Perfect. Thank you, Victor, for enlightening us on what you did for our state here in New South Wales. And I can testify that the Services New South Wales app worked extremely well, and it actually worked very well for us during COVID and those rule and our emergencies. So, and we're one of the first states to actually implement all these measures. So thank you very much for that. I will now pass the floor on to Marion Pfeiffer, and I think it's a great lead on from what Victor has mentioned, as Marion is a legal compliance professional with experience in Australia and Austria for the past 15 years. She currently works in the Australian financial services sector as a privacy compliance specialist in the context of technology, cyber, data, and AI for Australia's largest bank, and that's the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So, Marion, I'll leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. And hard act to follow, Victor. I really love the New South Wales app. Sorry, Anita, you don't have access to that in Melbourne. So really good one. Victor, I want to actually pick up a few keywords that I heard from you there as well, and in particular, a focus on individual and focus on trust. Because I don't think we can talk about cybersecurity without actually breaking it down to that. Because while cybersecurity, we often talk about it in an operational aspect and availability of data, but what the data loss actually means to an individual, this is what we're really intensely looking at from a privacy perspective as well. How do we keep data safe? How do we minimize impacts to customers, to individuals, and all of the harm that can occur? we've been shaken in Australia, like you said, Luke and Victor, you alluded to that as well. The Optus and Medibank breaches have really shaken the Australian community, just because we never thought a big telecommunications company, health insurer, could so easily lose personal information, then get out on the dark web. What we then see from a banking perspective as well, a really steep increase in frauds and scams, significant financial losses to our customers. Just really heartbreaking stories that we hear there as well. It could be also public embarrassment. There was sensitive personal information and health data involved in those breaches, or disclosure of safe addresses for people in domestic violence situations. So if you actually break it down to the individual level, you can see how severe those impacts are and how easily we could all be impacted on that, and how important it actually is. So I always like to have that focus on that as well. And while it's really important to protect organizations as well, so we can do our job well, it can easily, no matter whether you're a small organization or a large one, it can take you out of business. But I would like to focus on that as well. And I'd like to focus on, like the security practices that you have in your business, and the good privacy and privacy hygiene practices that you roll out in your organization have an impact on the trust. And once you lose that from a customer, it's not that easy to gain back. And that's what we see from the big breaches as well, and that it has a ripple effect. And I also want to refer to what Anita said before. One of the major things is not just your own practices, but the whole value chain. All of the third parties that you use, all of the vendors, everyone you share your data with, in the whole value chain, is just really important that you vet against, expectations against yourself, the regulator, and customer and communities. And then obviously you also need to protect customers from themselves, because it's just such a tricky space that we operate in. With Luke, you mentioned as well, everyone's getting more sophisticated. The things that we put in place today are often outdated next week, or even tomorrow. It's really important that we take good steps to protect our customers as well, and individuals from themselves, especially those who have a tendency to click on the phishing links and fall easily for fraud and scams. So there's a little bit of a dual approach that I want to leave you with in terms of the measures that you need to consider. It's not just keeping the data safe, but what if somebody else loses the data, the individual themselves loses the data through malware attacks, things like that. And then those things get out in the dark web, get combined because there were several breaches. And then there's identity takeover. How do you respond to things like that, to these identity takeovers where you have impersonation or social engineering because of all of the information that's available out there? And how do you protect from that there's not harm coming from that side either? So quite a lot of things and obligations and responsibilities sitting there in organizations as well to keep information safe. I just wanted to also touch on a few things, from a privacy perspective that I'll also like to say in this context in terms of good privacy practices and hygiene. Manage your honeypots, because organizations, in particular big tech, telcos, banks, we have a very rich and varied data set, and we create these honeypots of really attractive sets of data that obviously attract domestic and global threat actors. So how can you do that? You really need to manage these honeypots, actually, not just in terms of protection, but with effective data minimization practices. Really only bring in the personal information that you absolutely need. Know your retention schedules, get rid of the things that you don't need anymore. That's really easy, I know. I'm being facetious here because we know how complex it is to get rid of data and to do that. But it's just data minimization, one of the key things that you can do upfront to control that problem as well. And I remember with Medibank and Optus, people were aghast because there was so much information in there from customers and individuals that were no longer customers of that organization and haven't been in the last 10 or 15 years. And it could have been minimized, the whole blast radius around that. The next thing is really know what data you hold and where it is. And that's also easier said than done, but it's really, really important. Where do you keep your information? Because there are sandpits and non-production environments, and there's backups, and there's this vendor and this software as a service, and then we have stuff in cloud and on-prem, and then we shared it with that vendor to do some fancy things for us. And it's really important knowing where your data actually flows, because as soon as you have one little vulnerability, what are your onion layers of making sure that you don't just fall like domino pieces from one system into the next and then just can get everywhere. So it's really important, if you want to take proactive steps to protect those honeypots, you really need to know what you're dealing with in your own organization. And then obviously training and awareness, just always make sure that everyone is as much as possible aware of all of the current threats, of current measures. Train yourself and your staff, your customers, make sure that everyone is really aware of the threat landscape and what we all can do to work together, because cybersecurity is really a responsibility that is a multi-party approach. Because while you can do a lot of things in your organization, in your business, and also as an individual yourself, but you need to look at the value chain. You really look at different sectors working together effectively, and making sure that, we just really have the right processes in place. And that may involve also, some data sharing and some understanding. For example, a telco that can block the threat actors, but they can also alert, financial services providers to keep the affected accounts safe. So there's quite a lot that still needs to be done and to consider. There's quite a lot that privacy legislation has to catch up on as well, in terms of creating some permitted situations for data sharing, for example, so we can all work together on a bigger scale to work against that threat. I might just pause here and see if there are any questions, or whether Anita and Victor just wanted to chime into something.
Yeah, I'm happy just to add to that, Marion, very quickly, and also to what you said earlier, Victor. So I think, it's fascinating to hear you both talk about the same topic from different angles. And again, I think Marion, working for the largest bank in Australia, what I hear is like these challenges of legacy systems and multiple data systems and all those vendors and regulations, and then also the preparedness of when an incident actually happens, right? And me coming from the consulting side, working across industries, across organizations, different maturity levels, I see more often than not, unfortunately, a lot of unpreparedness for both sides of the topic. So what I see a lot is that, on one side, there's no structured approach of how to close or minimize cybersecurity risks, because we all know it's like an assessment which can start with, okay, what's the risk appetite? What are the, look at the data, the technology, the processes, the people, whatever angle you want to take to go through a structured assessment and identify the biggest gaps to then determine what you actually need to fix first. So it's like that structured approach of how to tackle that problem or the challenge or the big risk of minimizing cybersecurity attacks. And then the second step is also that, okay, well, as Victor, you said, right, getting the person out of the water and make sure even when stuff happens, they still walk away and say, "Oh, those guys have managed it well," Because across Australia, we've seen a lot of mismanagement on that. What I felt looking at it from the outside in, a lot of unpreparedness of certain scenarios, from mostly also from the top down, right? If you're the CMO, a CEO, or a CEO, or the head of board, there was lack of communication for a week at a time where it was already in the news, the data got hacked, but there was this frozenness of organizations of how to respond to it and what to deal with it, which again created more anxiety in the market. So I think being prepared for business incidents, cybersecurity one specifically is really important. And again, the structured frameworks, right, is like identifying, determining your risk assessment, your risk appetite, identifying your risks, figuring out mitigation plans and strategies, implementing them, right? So you want to have the comms pre-approved. If you have an attack where personal data is compromised, you want to have your legal team having it reviewed and it all approved before it happens. So you have the stuff ready to go when it happens. And also being clear, I guess, the chain of commands and who then does the press release and who then answers reporters and what's the message to your customers, to your partners, and to everyone else. And then I guess that the end of the last step of the process will be the practicing, right? The preparing, the practicing, and making sure these things are updated on a regular basis. Yeah. Thank you. That's my comment to both of you, Marion and Victor.
Thanks. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, effective preparation and stress testing on a regular basis is really key.
Yeah,
I would like to say that I heard the opinion or the talk of Ms. Raquel Falk, CEO of the Cyber Security Cooperative Research Center, and she was speaking about creating a space for exchanging information about companies or institutions that had been hacked, had problems, and to create a safe space for communication that would allow them to speak freely of their experience and not have information leaked to the media or compromise the company even more on the stock market, for example. So I was wondering whether anything like that was already being set up. Victor, do you know about such spaces?
I remember the discussion. I don't know whether anything has happened as a result. Marion, or do you recall?
No, it's the same as you. I remember the conversation, but I'm not aware of any actions as a result. Yeah.
I thought that was an important part of a public policy to tackle the issue, to learn who was being hacked, how it usually passes, how people react, and let them exchange the experience.
Yeah, agreed.
There's also often, my understanding is there's also often, there's like demands for money or payments. And, there have been scenarios before of, that company then paid that fee to whatever account and whatnot was provided, and the data was all back. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether either of you have any experience with those scenarios.
I think the ransomware is a whole panel in itself when you talk about that and how difficult it is to make the decision whether to pay or not. I do know that there are already, some agencies that actually put a trustworthy score against the threat actors just to tell you whether they are known to return the data or not once you pay. But yeah, it's very difficult space because, once you pay, you make it more interesting, to have built this whole criminal industry around it, but not paying, may be the difference between you going out of business.
That's it, yeah.
I know inside the government there was a policy, don't pay at all. Yeah. But it goes to an earlier point in relation to the discussion. Like I remember speaking about this recently in a social media post about technology. Like technology's constantly changing. Like the golf ball constantly changes. You get better aerodynamics, but the real efficiency is not in the golf ball, it's in the human swing. That's the hardest thing to change. because once that's ingrained, it's part of muscle memory. So, we can change technology really fast and quite easy, but it's changing the culture of an organisation. That's the really hard part. And that's one thing that I know that the Australian Public Service are looking more at. How do we start building our internal core strength so that we are more and more match fit in a digital age? I speak to a lot of Australian public servants at a very senior level, and it's fair to say that some are match fit, some wouldn't have a clue when it comes to the digital world. And it's like saying to a treasurer, I'm happy to be a treasurer, but I'm not very confident with maths. You just cannot be a leader in an organisation, let alone a government, in 2024 if you do not have a rudimentary understanding of some of the tools at your disposal. And so I think, building that leadership and that capability, not just in cyber, but right across the landscape is a big challenge.
Yeah, I fully agree. So, Victor, and it's not only in the public sector, I think it's across industries that,
Yep.
I mean, some may be more challenged than others, but, it's definitely fair to say that technology has been evolving so fast. Specifically, AI is such a hype at the moment. And there's not only ChatGPT, but about 100 different AIs. And then the question is, how do we use AI? And I think generically, even between digital professionals, even I'd say, technology is developing at a rapid pace, but us knowing really how to use it to its full extent, it's always a catch-up mode, because the big technology vendors, right? An example, my business, we're an Oracle consulting partner. Oracle invested here $6 billion US in product development, and that's just one technology vendor on the scope. So the product's capabilities keeps evolving, and we as humans and organizations, I feel like we're forever behind the able curve of really driving the value out of it, and also knowing how to securely, I guess, use it.
Yeah, and Anita, you're spot on in that. Yeah, we're always generally behind, but because of the pace of change is so fast, that gap is getting bigger and bigger. And I guess the challenge is, particularly for governments, if there is a huge gap between where the real world is, the private sector is, where people use Uber to order food, etc., and then government, because we're notoriously slow, if there is a yawning gap between the two, that's when there's starting to become a really big trust deficit. Because people say to the government, I can order food on my phone, and yet you're asking me to line up in front of a queue for 3 hours or fill out 20 forms just to get some basic information. You're either incompetent or you're corrupt. It's a real trust play. But the challenge is, again, the pace of tech and the fact that, in the past, governments and some of the bigger organisations that were slow could have a closed mindset. We'll get there. It's okay to be slow and last and in the last quadrant, but you don't have that luxury anymore because of the pace of change.
Yeah, spot on, which is another key topic for organizations in general. I'm looking at the audience here of the Austrians. I'm sure it's the same in Austria and in Australia. It's like this as an operation organization, it's that operating model of ongoing improvement, right? This constant review, prioritizing your activities and implementing it and learning and going. So it's this constant, like doing the same thing in 12 months, what we're doing now means you're behind, right? So it's that constant evolving and as an organization implementing that operating model to at least keep moving with the wave.
Let us involve our audience, and I would like to invite all of them to ask questions. Andor, Christoph, you have written in the question and answer section that you are project manager for 2 projects in the energy sector in Australia. that cybersecurity is a top topic that you need to solve. Maybe you want to ask a question or specify what you have written?
Of course, yeah. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. Yeah, I'm leading at the moment 2 projects in Australia. One is the Kidston Pump Storage project in Queensland, and the other one is in Victoria, a synchron condenser, stabilizing or future stabilizing the grid in that area. And cybersecurity concerns us very much, as first of all, there is the Act. Then it has certain standards behind, some let's say, we call it onions, where different level of security needs to be covered here. And here is always the definition, who is taking which responsibility until which level, what is required to be performed, let's say, hardware on hardware ground. So on that what we deliver, or even how it is set up. And a lot of things is overlapping security to protect these public investments and secure the electricity in Australia in a manner that both parties, all stakeholders are involved, has to make similar identical measures, that there is no restriction to enter somebody who has nothing to do with that part of the topic. And my main concern is to find a way how other businesses has already certain kind of solutions to bring that into that what I'm discussing with my stakeholders and customers in these 2 projects, and many more to come at the moment.
Does anybody want to reply to Christoph's situation, Mr. Christoph's situation? Andor is your first name, is that correct?
Absolutely right. Yeah, Andor is my first name.
Okay.
I think we also had some questions regarding that came in earlier regarding solutions. So in the previous discussion we had, we talked about how AI is a challenge at the moment for cybersecurity. However, we had a question that came in is saying, how can AI actually become part of our cybersecurity strategies? Are there any benefits from using AI? And another question that came in was also, how do we use blockchain within our solutions for cybersecurity? I think maybe for Victor, blockchain without digital ID could be an advantage, but I think AI in general, using in privacy or in cybersecurity in general, could be used to our advantage. So maybe we can discuss a little bit, maybe solutions rather than those challenges that we all face.
Yes, sure. So I'm happy to, I guess, speak a little bit to both topics. So with the end with your challenges, there's no easy answer, I think, is the answer, right? I think there's really a bit of a structured approach to work through this, and how shall I say, it's like, I think it depends down a little bit more in the details of what technologies you're using and what vendors are you using and who's accessing it and what's the overarching business strategy and solution architecture to really help you, I guess, with this discussion a bit more. And I'm sure one of the key challenges is in the market is finding the real experts, because I think there's a lot of generalists, and I think generalists are probably important to set up the overarching strategy and the approach, but then you also need people who understand the technology you're using, and there again it will be the technology specific experts, right, which would be, I don't know, if you're with Microsoft, there would be Microsoft specific cybersecurity specialists. If you're with Salesforce, they would have own Salesforce cybersecurity specialists, right, to really hone in on what that means for you. And very quickly, I think with Luke, your topic around modern technology, my point of view is with AI tools, it depends on which AI tool we're talking about, right? If it's just ChatGPT where you ask a question or you put your 10 points in and ask them to write a nice summary, which you can post online. I think there can be soft rules around that, around how your employees engage with those tools. I mean, typical examples are that system coders have been putting code through AI for AI to write the code, and they then put it into the system, right? But this could be hacked, and you may have malware code in your software product because people who are coding those things are using AI to solve business problems. So I think there needs to be business rules around how your employees engage with AI to minimize the risk. And I think this will depend on the industry you're in.
I think a really good point, Anita, because that's what we're seeing as well. There's obviously enormous potential and opportunity, whether we apply it to cybersecurity or other things. But we're also still grappling with understanding the risk exposure around those things as well. Because the way you can look at AI, what risks does AI introduce that we don't already have, but just exacerbate to, like on steroids now? And how do we manage that? Victor, you spoke to silos before. We often speak in silos when we talk about different risk types. How do we manage? Because AI is forcing us to look at it horizontally in all of the different areas of risk, in all of the different business areas. How are we achieving our business objectives? But there's privacy, there's model risk, there's all sorts of things that you need to consider there. But while why are we going through this? It's because it's a revolution. Obviously, it's helping us. And in the context of what I said before, your good security and privacy practices. Previously, we weren't able to sift through, like hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of data, of unstructured data, to fully understand what is actually sitting in there. How much sensitive personal information do we have? How many government-related identifiers do we have that expose, and present quite a lot of risk to us? There's quite a lot of opportunity now in actually understanding it, categorizing it, and then taking appropriate risk measures. I think it just really depends on how you're using it and building the right frameworks around it.
Yeah, and just on that, Marianne, in terms of frameworks, when I was a minister, New South Wales introduced an AI assurance framework in 2021. It was the first of its kind in the world. And then because I could see we were moving really fast from a digital perspective, I could see what was happening with AI. I said, we're not going to get a social license to keep moving forward unless we get a framework in place. So we published ours in December 2021. Singapore came out with theirs in 2022. And then there's been a handful of jurisdictions around the world that have got their own assurance framework. The International Standards Organization are building towards a ISO assurance, AI assurance framework towards the end of this year, early next year. The reason I say that is the federal government now has essentially adopted the New South Wales AI assurance framework. So when you're using AI, when I speak to large government organisations and large organisations generally, they have AI or the tools, but a lot of them are scared to use it properly or to the extent that they can because of the risk, because they don't know where the boundaries are. So what we are doing now as a company is we're saying, well, look, we will check the way you're using AI and make sure that it is assured against the framework, i.e. you can operate to the extent that you can, rather than taking a very small, hyper-conservative approach to the use of AI. Use it to the extent that you are lawfully allowed, knowing that you are assured against a framework. Because otherwise, again, if in that risk environment, people will just see AI, take it, and just use 5% of it, in which case, why use it at all?
Perfect. Thanks, guys, for that for that explanation. I think we have 2 questions also came in. I might invite Mr. Ulmer to unmute himself if he can and maybe ask his question.
Thank you very much. I think one of the challenges what Andres is facing, particularly on the energy sector in Australia, and how is the SOCI Act, what is the federal law on this issue, and how to protect basically strategic installations, not only in the delivery, but also for the operation of this. We face the issue that, of course, the dispatch centers of the respective utilities, as well as on the overall transformation of Australia from going from coal into renewables, everything is then up to date. And the issue is how we are going to phase in what is basically state of the art into structures which partly cannot even cope with this, and basically assure availability or a functionality also for the next 15 years. So this is an issue which basically needs to be addressed. It's nice to have a law. It's also nice to work on this. We are very much equipped to do that. But of course, the receiving parameters, because it's the total value chain, which you have to look at, needs to be also up to date.
I think
and
also
there
we
we
had
struggle at the moment.
I tend to agree with you there. It's always a bit of a challenge that we're seeing in the privacy space as well. The tensions that we sometimes see in terms of, how everything is really fast moving in terms of technology and cybersecurity, and how can we enable that in the tension space of privacy. We don't have all the appropriate exemptions and permitted situations because our act is relatively old. And there are things, where even government has expectations on us as an organisation to do more to protect customers from fraud and scams, for example. But how can we enable that? So essentially, it's, to mitigate one risk, another one rises. It's always a little bit like that, the tension space in there. But I think where we need to discuss that topic as well is, cost benefit risks as well. How far do you want to go? You don't really want to accept non-compliance with the law, but if ultimately it's the better outcome for a customer, for an economy, for, communities, what's the best way of addressing that? And how can you articulate that risk for your organisation as well?
Exactly, Marian, I think this is spot on. I think it needs to have at least implementation, harmonization over the various sectors, because it does not help if the private sector is pushing and basically it's connected to a federal or a statewide infrastructure, and the infrastructure is not yet up to date. So, and the goals and the directions, because there is not one solution, there are many solutions, needs to be very clear. And it's very easy to address a list of risks. And then who is going to take the lead? What are we able to compromise for the time being? And what are the things we need to close ASAP? And this is this kind of gap, which at the moment I see as one of the major challenges.
Victor, what is your view on that? I mean, is government aware of this? And Josef Ulmer, have you approached government about this topic?
Yes, we are in discussions.
I might just jump in here too, that we also had a question come in of what are the considerations we really need to consider here in Australia in securing our critical infrastructure. So here's a clear example of energy. We had to say, how do we do that in the medical field or transportation or banking? So I think this idea of securing critical infrastructure is obviously quite an important topic that that is on the forefront of many people's minds.
Is where the regulation actually has come in a little bit more. We have a prudential standard that talks to critical operations that will, at least the regulated sectors, they will have to comply, I think, by end of FY25, so June next year, I think. Which means you need to understand all of your critical operations. You would have to have that mapped, the whole value chain for it. You need to have a business continuity plan. You need to understand, how to secure it, and you need to stress test on a regular basis. You have to have that all documented within the risk appetite as well. And it's a very, very tight regulatory standard as well, and is following actually what the UK has implemented previously. So there is a lot of stuff on foot in Australia where we will all have to catch up on. So there's quite a lot to do there.
But Marion, this is pinpoint on. I think the implementation time by end of 2025 is tremendously challenges, because you don't only need to do software and hardware issues on the private side. You need also, wherever you integrate with utilities or government sectors, they also need to be on speed on this. No?
Agree.
Because otherwise it will not work. Yeah? And when you talk about the UK issue, UK had a 15 years preparation on this, and they still struggle.
Yeah, we weren't granted that luxury.
And they still struggle today. Yeah, so it's a need for sure. How to do it in a proper way, and also in an economical way, and in a way where we don't infringe privacy on the one hand, and on the other hand, protect privacy very much. It's a big gap. Huh?
I see that we also have another question coming. I know that we're running out of time, so I might just ask, is Impact AI, sorry, I can't see your name, but if you want to unmute yourself and just ask your question, I think this might be the last one for this session.
Yes. Hello. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, correct. We can hear you.
Great. So, yeah, thanks for the possibility to pose the question. And it adds to the discussion that was just one question ago, basically about the AI framework. At Impact AI,
can you just introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. What I just wanted to do at Impact AI, we we work on an application level of AI. So basically, our customers would be now someone like Comcast, Sky, big infrastructure companies, also telecommunication providers, and they are really working on AI applications and want to make sure that those AI applications don't pose any cybersecurity risk to the internal infrastructure. So no additional cybersecurity risk. Let's say it's a niche of cybersecurity, right? Currently. And we see that with our customers and partners, most of them really tend to look at the NIST risk framework. We also have quite good communications with or experience with the DoD and with frameworks from the Homeland Security. So, and we see that also in the UK, many companies tend to adopt these frameworks or guidelines because they are very tangible and very, as far as it gets clear currently. So my question would be, there was a lot of discussion about general cybersecurity issues, which are the same globally, but how are the Australian companies tackling that? I heard there's the AI framework done within Australia, but do you also look at the NIST risk framework, for example, in a very practical way?
And I think all of our three speakers here have experience in dealing with people and with companies, so it'll be great to hear all their opinions here.
Yep.
Maybe we'll start with
Yeah,
Marion.
in short, we do. Absolutely. So there's always, you know, ways of slicing it. And ultimately, you know, it also depends on prioritization and risk assessments. The NIST framework is really comprehensive and really, really good, but it also means, you know, the implementation of a lot of capabilities and controls, all on an equal playing field and level. So I think where it's really important is to find the right prioritization for your business, which are the key ones to identify, and just start from there, because I think you just really need to chunk it down a little bit when you look at something comprehensive as NIST, which is really great and desirable to have all of it, and everyone I think would love to have all of it. But the thing there is, and we do actually do capability assessments against the NIST framework on a regular basis, just to see where they're outliers and where we need to do more and where we need to address those things. So I think this is also, Victor, to your point about assurance. It's really important, you know, to actually, yes, you have your framework, you have your risk appetite, you have your prioritization, and then you need to do assurance to see your blind spots as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like a student should never mark his or her own homework, particularly when you're dealing with a high risk environment that has the potential to cause you know, big impact on life or lifestyle. So yeah, that's why, particularly when it comes to AI, or no different to cyber, the things in relation to AI, because it's still nascent in terms of the assurance and its application to cyber. New South Wales mandated the assurance framework. Other jurisdictions simply said, oh, well, let's use it as a guidance. But I've got no doubt, particularly the way that Europe is moving and the ISO is moving, high risk environments will have to have assurance around it.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, this whole risk management topic is like a board level discussion, right? Because it really boils down to risk threshold and risk appetite of an organization, which then drives down into the risk frameworks of what can, you know, how much risk can an organization afford and how much risk is an organization willing to take in order to move fast.
Great points from all of our speakers. I think on that note, we will wrap this session up tonight. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. The Honourable Victor Dominello, Anita Pata, and Marion Pfeiffer. Experts in their fields know much more than what I could ever provide. So I thank you very much for joining us today and enlightening us about the current situation here in Australia, and what frameworks, what challenges, and what opportunities that really do lie here in Australia that could be of interest to our Austrian counterparts. I would like to remind all of those who have joined us today, that this is the first of a series of activities that we'll be hosting in regard to cybersecurity and technology in the lead up to the Australian Cyber Conference, which will take place between the 26th and 28th of November. So you will hear more from us from our office and how to become involved with our other activities. I would also like to publicly thank a couple of organisations which helped us publicise today's event. One in particular is the Women's for Cyber. Women's for Cyber is a non-for-profit European private foundation with the objective to promote, engage and support the participation of women in the field of cybersecurity. If you are interested in this organisation, please let us know and we're happy to put you in touch with the relevant people. And also IT Cluster Upper Austria. If you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to contact us on our email address at sydney@advantageaustria.org. We would be happy to direct your inquiries, or if you'd like to get in contact with these excellent speakers or have any suggestions, or would like to connect with them, or have further questions, or like to work with them, we'd be more than happy to facilitate those introductions. So please do not hesitate to contact us. For anything else, we're always here. Our office in Sydney, again, doesn't look after just tech, but we have focuses in health, sports, and energy and mining. So all big topics currently in Australia. and a lot of discussion happening here in Australia where we can involve our counterparts from other countries such as Austria. On that note, I'd like to wrap up today's event. Thank you again to our speakers, and thank you for everyone for joining us. Thank you and have a great day ahead, and good night to our speakers.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
For
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Anita,
Bye-bye.
Marion.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.